Hey, Fanboy Nation.
This is your pal Daffy Duck, and you're watching.
We're watching
You're watching Fanboy.
Fanboy,
a fanboy, etc.
Fanboy Nation.
Dot, I assume Tom.
This afternoon, we get to discuss a topic that is so rarely thought of today in the modern world, and that is the notion of adult bullies. And today I am with clinical social worker, licensed clinical social worker and author of Our New World of Adult Bullies, How to Spot Them and How to Stop Them, Bill Eddy. Bill, how are you today?
I'm great, RC. Thanks for having me on.
You know, this is an interesting topic because usually when we think of bullies, we think of the old schoolyard bully, the one shooting spitballs, the one, you know, beating you up or stuffing you into lockers. And I'm using all the old stereotypes. But also there was another type of bully in school that people forgot about, was the kid that instigated everything and got everybody around him in trouble. And then he came out smelling like roses while everybody else was being punished for his instigation.
That's right. That's really the passive-aggressive bully. Passive-aggressive is really aggressive. It's just hidden. And they kick you under the table while they're smiling at you, and everyone else sees them smiling at you. So when you react, that's when you look bad and they look good. So you got to watch out for that.
You know, how do you avoid a situation like that before we get deeper into the book?
Well, I think the key is to understand bullies have primitive emotional power. They hook us beneath our conscious awareness in terms of fear, in terms of anger. And so we have to be prepared for that and realize everybody's got a good chance to get a bully in their life sometime sooner or later. And so you've got to be prepared not to overreact and realize, oh, but also don't underreact. And I can say more about that. But the thing is to be aware this is going to happen to you. It's going to happen to everybody these days because we're seeing more adult bullies than ever before.
Does that play into the notion of, you know, Mike Tyson had said once, everybody has a plan till they get punched in the mouth. And, you know, it's become, now, I'm not advocating violence, obviously, but it's becoming a situation where we've become less of the whole stand up to the bully and eventually everyone will see them for what they are versus, you know, that quick smack and they learn, oh, this is the one not to bother with.
Yeah, but the approach I really recommend that seems to work best is what we call the assertive approach, which is a middle ground there. Because if you punch them, that's aggressive, and now you look like a bully, like you said. But if you let them walk all over you, people aren't all going to figure that out. That's one thing we've got to know today is people don't realize, and bullies are getting more nuanced as they get older once they're adults. And so you want to take that middle pathway where you speak up and say, hey, I don't like that, or hey, I don't agree with that. Doesn't have to be a big confrontation, but just something that says, I'm not going along with this. So it's not aggressive, but it's not passive, because the passive approach right now, and I think there is too much of it, is tolerating bullies, and they're getting empowered from that.
What was the catalyst to write this book? Because, you know, there have been movies made over the years where there's the office bully, you know, the guy that pawns his work off onto his coworker or his subordinate and still gets all the credit. And it's still that, you know, third grade level behavior, but now it's in an office setting. You know, was that something that was kind of the callus of this, or is this based on online interaction?
It's really based on everywhere, because for the last 40 some years, I've been working with what we call high conflict personalities in families, in the workplace, and in legal disputes. But the most high conflict personalities are the bullies. And I've been seeing them in all these different settings, but most people haven't. So it's been the nature of the work I've been doing. But now we're seeing them pop up everywhere. And the thing I wanted to explain is they have the same pattern everywhere. So keep your eyes out. Look for this. Be aware. There's, you know, maybe 5 to 10% of people are bullies. So that's 1 in 10, 1 in 20. You're going to be running into them. And they try bullying everybody. But the people they keep bullying are the people that aren't assertive, that, back down, maybe passive, maybe trigger fear, etc. So it's this percent of people that really grew up being bullies but never stopped. 90% of childhood bullies are over it by the time they're adults. So this is that 10% that persists and actually gets more nuanced about it so they can be more effective.
Chapter 1 prepares us to understand ourselves and whether we're the passive type, whether we're the assertive type, whether we eventually become assertive. What are some key identifiers? And we'll put you on the spot for this, that you prepared yourself because you had to do research on this topic, that you go, oh, I've experienced this myself, or my wife, or my child, or my, coworker has experienced this, and this is based on a certain personality type that they don't, or personality trait that they don't see in themselves.
Yeah, so as I mentioned in the introduction of the book, when I was in third grade, I had my own personal bully. And my parents had taught me it takes two to make a fight, and you're not allowed to fight. So if somebody's starting to fight with you, just walk away. They said, well, what if I can't just walk away? They said, find a way to walk away. So anyway, I learned to cope mostly by anticipating where my bully would be, how to avoid him. But then, my career, and I didn't really think of this till looking back on it. My career has been in many ways dealing with bullies, recognizing them, helping people in families cope with a domestic violence or child abuser, helping people at work deal with a bully or sexual harasser, people in the community, neighbors. So, and online has the same issues, only on steroids. So what we're seeing is the same patterns of behavior. And that's what I wanted to teach people about. So yeah, what I learned for myself was you have to be assertive, but you also have to anticipate situations so you can either avoid them or even get some help in dealing with them. So those are a couple of the big themes. Don't go it alone if you can get some help, but don't back down, be assertive as long as it's safe.
And sometimes, this is something that I've noticed, with the passive aggressive bully, it's always somebody that's smaller in stature pulling these tricks on someone much larger than them, in either trying to goat them into that behavior or trying to coerce them into something. And when that larger person asserts themselves, they often look like the inverse, where when they're standing up to the little person for being the agitator, they come across looking bad. What do you tell somebody that is either the gentle giant or looks like could possibly be the aggressor, in how to deal with that smaller stature person? Because that's the court of public opinion in this.
Right, right. So I think in many ways you want to do as much as you can to steer clear of that person, because if you engage, especially at an aggressive level with them, hey, you're toast because you're bigger. And so it's trying to manage that, but also not to totally back down. Just let them know that's not okay, it's not acceptable, and explaining to the people around you, hey, this person's behavior is really out of line, and I want you to know there may be times that it'd be really great if you could also join me in saying, hey, that's enough, buddy. That's all I have to say, is just, that's enough, buddy, because I'm going to be saying that, and I need to look like I'm not alone with that.
You mentioned earlier, and it's in the book quite a bit, primitive emotional powers, and you've abbreviated it as PEP. What are these primitive emotional powers, and how did you develop this terminology for it?
Well, one thing I observed is bullies seem to always be telling a story, and that it has three parts to it. That there's a terrible crisis, there's an evil villain, and I'm your superhero, which is part of the underpinnings of humanity, is we're susceptible to that story. But what I found in doing a bunch of reading and such is that we have the same primitive emotions as all mammals. And so fear is one. Actually, one source I looked at said there's seven emotional systems that we have in common. So we have fear, we have rage or anger when it's under control. We also have caring, and we also care for people when they're in a panic or a sense of grief. So caring and grief go together, I think. And what I call it is loyalty, love/loyalty, because this is what bullies use. They get you afraid, which makes you more emotional. And when you're more emotional, you absorb other people's emotions more. They get you angry, either at somebody else or at yourself. And a lot of bullies make you angry at yourself. You say, oh, why didn't I do this or that? I should have said this or that. But they also inspire what I call love loyalty. And it's really loyalty. They want you not to tell what's going on. They want you to be loyal to them. Keep this a secret and maybe pick on somebody else with me. You'll be my buddy if you pick on this other person with me. But they tell you they love you. And we see this like domestic violence and such. I love you, but I don't really, that's not what it really is. It's I want you to be loyal to me. So bullies seem to activate these three primitive emotions. And what I believe is that we're not conscious of it, that it takes a while for us to consciously become aware. And we're already liking the bully and hating the target and already afraid. So we end up joining with the bully against ourselves or against somebody else.
You being also a lawyer, that's an interesting concept that you're mentioning this, because we've seen recently aspects, and I'm not picking sides, obviously, in recent situations with our former president of the United States, but there are people on the blue team that have said, well, he stacked the deck of the Supreme Court in his favor because knowing that he was going to be a target, and that's why he stacked the deck. And then you have people on the right that will sit there and say, well, obviously he needed to stack the deck in the Supreme Court because they were going to weaponize the DOJ. And how do we find this middle balance using the law and not abusing it in something like this? Because it seems like our politicians are now the adult bullies.
Well, we are seeing more of that. And one thing I want to say right off the bat is I'm not going to say any specific person is a bully or isn't a bully, but I'm going to talk about the dynamics. And yes, we are seeing more bullies entering politics, and that's at all levels, in communities as well as nations and internationally. So the thing to me is to recognize these patterns of behavior. And in the book, I have 10 powers, and I call them hidden powers of bullies, but the reality is they're hidden in plain sight, that you can see them. Like I was just telling you about the bully story, where they say there's a terrible crisis, you should be angry at yourself or this other person, and you should love or be loyal to me. And so you can start noticing, wait, is that really a crisis? Somebody's talking about a crisis, because that's the foundation of the bully's story. And right there is a time people need to do their own critical thinking and say, wait a minute, that's not a real crisis. They're just saying that it is. And so in politics, we all, I believe we all come in with slightly different political personalities. I think you'll probably see about a third of people, maybe even born or early childhood, are more conservative, more tradition-oriented, more authority respecting, more stable where they are, and a third maybe liberal, maybe more interested in traveling the world, maybe more, let's not look at authority the same way, let's question authority, things like that. And then there's a third of people that kind of tip back and forth. And in politics, that's who really decides elections today. But we have these kind of different, we come in with our personalities and people kind of pull us in their direction or the other person's direction. But this is where I get into polarization. in the book, and that polarization is something often that bullies promote, and again, beneath our awareness. So we're not really aware it's happening, but now we know there's like red and blue states. And, I remember, what was it, 30 years ago? Before there were red and blue states. I've got relatives in each, in red states and blue states, and we love each other. We don't hate each other. So a lot of these are things that the dynamics are important to notice. And if you see someone using those towards you or towards someone else, is be more assertive about, hey, that's not okay.
And let's take it from the bully's perspective. Say a bully is reading your book and didn't realize that they were a bully and now have come to terms with it. How do they break the pattern using the guidelines that you've set?
Well, basically, and I focus on this in the last chapter, is really throughout the book I talk about setting limits and imposing consequences on bullies. Each of the 10 chapters has 6 strategies, and setting limits and imposing consequences are 2 of the 6 strategies people need to do more of and say no earlier. But in the last chapter I talk about things like coaching and training and people learning to kind of rein in these parts where they're criticizing a whole person. And that's one of the chapters too, is personalization. Bullies make it personal. It's about your intelligence, your morals, your sanity, how you look, how you dress, all of that. And so someone that realizes, hey, I've slipped into that, I need to rein that back in. That's a really good skill, is to hold your tongue. And learning to do that is something about, because we do a lot of coaching through our High Conflict Institute, and about half of people can take off the rough edges and become less bullying or stop bully behavior, and maybe about half the people continue it. So they really need to have more limits set on them. And in some cases, society needs to be protected from them. So self-awareness is really a big step, because most bullies aren't really self-aware. So what you raise is a good question, RC, is that can people see that they're being a bully? And I'd say majority of bullies don't see it that way. They think they have to do what they're doing. They feel driven to be this way, in some cases from childhood.
With something like this, and the counteract for people that have been bullied is, and it's happened for men and women, because I see bodybuilders and fighters and whatnot, the hyper-masculinized personality, that I will never be bullied again. So they get into bodybuilding, they get into mixed martial arts, they get into something else, but they develop the bully attitude without necessarily becoming bullies. What do you tell those people? Because I don't like the phrase toxic masculinity, because masculinity isn't toxic, but there's toxic behaviors, in this hyper-masculinized ideal that they're presenting to the world.
I think the key is, are you protecting yourself or are you attacking other people? And so I think a bodybuilder can be really good at protecting themselves and maybe even help protect other people without attacking other people. It's that aggressive, assertive, passive situation. Don't be aggressive, be assertive. That means you're protecting yourself, but you're not letting yourself get walked on. Passives, where you're not even protecting yourself, you're not being aggressive, but you're letting people walk on you. And I would say today we're tipped more that way, that the average person who's reasonable assumes everyone else will be reasonable. But today we have to develop skills at setting limits on other people's personal behavior. We didn't have to do that on a large scale in the last few decades. We've just counted on everybody to be reasonable. But let's say 5 to 10% of people are bullies, and they'll take advantage of you unless you are more assertive. And so a lot of ways the book is a toolbox for being assertive, so that you can spot bullies and then stop them in your life.
Now, let's use me as an example, because I recently went through something similar to this with the passive aggressive type. And it was constant needling, needling, needling till it was brought up in a group setting, and I blew up at the person because after 3 weeks of this continuous needling, I had had enough and said, hey, how many times do I have to tell you this? And what looked complimentary from his end to me, which is exactly what was needling from my end, looked like, wait, this person just complimented you and now you're upset at it. But there's a whole backstory behind it that we don't need to go into. Afterwards, of course, I apologized because one, it was at church. And then, I went to confession for it afterwards. But I apologized for the blow up. I didn't apologize for what I said. And then part of how, the setting the boundaries thing, I reminded him that 20 years ago, this would have been a very different conversation when he found out what my combat sports background was in my 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, this would have been a very different conversation 20 years ago. So, instead of the blow up, if this ever happens again, say with either said person or a different person, how should I react to it? And how can I reel in my own emotions from something like that?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, with yourself, I think it helps is to tell yourself, this isn't about me. This is about that other person. So I can choose whether to respond or not. Now, it may be wise to respond because that's the setting a limit, like you said, but do it verbally. Do it with a calm, reasonable, hey, buddy, that's just, you're wrong. Or, hey, buddy, that's not appropriate. Or, hey, buddy, that's enough. And so you don't look like you're being aggressive. You're just kind of inserting a stop here, kind of a stop sign for the other person. And people are surprised that, a lot of bullies are kind of shocked because there's any response. And so a very simple response. I don't agree with you, buddy. Sometimes that's all it takes. And they're like, oh, this person's pushing back. So the thing, and it takes some practice, and we teach role playing with our trainings with our institute, is to practice having someone coming at you saying some angry stuff and how you can respond to set limits on them. So it takes some bit of practice. The normal response is what you described, is somebody picks on you and you respond in an aggressive way. But you can choose your response, and with practice and realize there's going to be more bullies in our world and in our lives, then we take this more assertive approach. You come out looking good, and the other person sometimes comes out looking bad or at least neutral. So it's somewhat of a preparation, and that's what I want to encourage people is be prepared. You're going to have bullies coming at you, and they'll catch you by surprise unless you notice warning signs and you're prepared to not overreact or underreact.
And now, to be clear, I've resolved the issue with this person and learned real quick that this isn't going to happen again. And, I did notice something that appeared to be microneedling, again, in a different manner with a different subject or a different behavior. And I just laughed at him, and it ended kind of quickly. Is that a proper response? Is laughing at somebody like that?
Laughing can be in a short form. If you laugh at a person and who they are, that can get more into bullying because, you're putting the person down, especially in public. If it's a humiliating kind of laugh, look at you, oh my goodness, you're a mess. But between one and one, sometimes a laugh can just be a good way to interrupt that flow. And that's another way of setting limits. Say, you're not going to get to me. You're not going to bother me. That's so silly what you just said. That's ridiculous. And then just leave it at that and change the subject. And so, like people have holiday gatherings. They say, what do we do? We've got somebody that's out of line. And, just have these little short statements and then change the subject. And often they're kind of disoriented because they were thinking they were going to dominate you, but they didn't.
Now, here's the passive-aggressive gaslighting question. When you become assertive to the bully, because I've seen this happen to people, and the bully actually calls you a bully for standing up for yourself.
Yeah, well, that's part of what I teach in the book is you have to have three theories of what's going on when someone says somebody's being a bully. Because one of them is that may be true, that person they're talking about is out of line, acting badly. Second is the person saying that actually is the bully, and they're accusing an innocent person. And you have to equally consider that these days, because bullies lie a lot, and they project a lot, and they play the victim a lot. And so the third possibility is maybe both people are doing some bullying. But what I find, most people we do consultations with and coaching with, is that they're the person who's being falsely accused. And in a lot of workplace situations, like I've done some training in Australia where they have anti-workplace bullying laws. And people that investigate, I said, what percent of the people who bring an investigation do you think are more of a bully? And one conference I was speaking at, they said maybe 40% of the people that bring a complaint of being bullied are actually the person doing more bullying behavior. So we got to be aware, bullies project a lot and they play the victim a lot, and they're not self-aware a lot. So they're kind of walking around ready to get you unless you know, hey, there's a small percent of people like this, and don't engage with them, but be ready to set limits if you have to.
Do you have a favorite foundational exercise that you use to start off people with your counseling, or is this case by case?
It's both. So I'd say one of the exercises that we're doing in trainings now, and we get like 30 people and get them to pair up and say, okay, one of you say that, your mother has a mustache or some bothersome thing, you're an idiot, you don't understand anything, Bill. And then the other person responds by saying, don't talk to me that way about my mother, or don't talk to me about me that way, or I'll have to end this conversation. And so the other person keeps going, well, I'll say whatever I want to say. I don't care what you think. Say, okay, you've decided I have to end this conversation. Let me know when you're ready for a civil conversation. Goodbye, and hang up or walk away. And what's interesting is when we practice that, people say it was really hard to interrupt the person. And yet by doing that a couple times, they gain more confidence to interrupt being bullied. Because most people are nice, reasonable people, and we don't like to interrupt people. But when a bully is going on saying inappropriate stuff, they should be interrupted, whether by a bystander or by you yourself. So yeah, that's a real easy practice exercise. And yet people are surprised at how uncomfortable it makes them at first, but then they gain confidence from that.
Now, take us through your counseling sessions and your group work. If we wanted to sign up for that after having read the book, how would we go about doing so?
Well, most of what we do is training. So we're not doing group work as much as training people who do. So we train people in the workplace, train people who do family counseling, for example. But in our training exercises, which are typically like one day, we'll put people through saying things, what we call ear statements that show empathy, attention, and respect. So you've got somebody coming at you saying, I'm mad at you, you messed this up, whatever, is that you can learn to say, hey, I can see how important this is to you, and I can understand your frustration. And just connecting with what they're experiencing tends to calm people down. And so we teach giving ear statements. Find something you respect about the person. Hey, you did a really good job last week on that project. Now, then we're teaching setting limits. And if you keep talking to me that way, I'm going to have to end the conversation. Or if you interrupt this meeting, we're going to have to stop the meeting and have you leave, and then we'll proceed with the meeting. And meetings are a place that we're starting to see bullies popping up more. And we also teach what we call BIFF response emails. And BIFF, B-I-F-F, stands for brief, informative, friendly, and firm. And it's a way of writing emails. And people love it. We've been teaching this since 2007. And it really calms a lot of hostile written conversations and online conversations. When people say, here's some information you may not have. Because someone, let's say, says you're an idiot online. It's a group chat or something. Say, you're an idiot. You never did such and such. And so rather than responding by saying, no, I'm not an idiot, that's defensive, or saying you're the idiot, that's aggressive. Instead, you say, here's a piece of information you may not have. This is something that I've been doing actually for the last couple of years. You may not be aware of that. So you give some information without getting into the emotional argument. So you keep it brief. It's straight information, a friendly tone. It might be, I hope that's helpful. And firm, it ends the conversation. You don't put any hooks like, what do you think of that, buddy? You just end the conversation. And a lot of good BIFF responses do that. There's no further response. But sometimes maybe you have to ask a question and you say, just let me know yes or no by Thursday at 5. So it really limits what people can argue about. So most of what we do is educational. We do coaching, including individual coaching and practice with exercises like these. And so people can say, like, coming up next week, I'm going to be dealing, I have to talk to my boss, and my boss is a bit of a bully. And so we practice and role play. Okay, you tell me what your boss would say. I'll pretend I'm you. And then now let's switch roles. I'll say what your boss would say, and you be yourself and think of what you're going to say to set limits if you need to. So it's mostly teaching exercise focused. We don't do the kind of discussion like, how are you feeling this week? We leave that to therapists around the world. But we like to innovate methods and teach them and then see them ripple out. So that's the ideal.
And now let's say bullying in religious institutions and passive aggressive language we'll hear in various denominations or various religions of, well, I'll just pray for you, or I'll pray about that, in trying to coerce someone into doing something that they clearly refuse to want to do. How do you deal with that in a house of worship where the entire intent of a house of worship is to be a loving person?
That's a tough one, and not all that uncommon. We hear about that. My business partner, Megan, has done more trainings with church groups. So two things. One is, well, first of all, people need to recognize that church groups are more vulnerable because church groups are more welcoming. And so here we welcome everybody, right? Well, you're going to get some bullies as part of that. And be aware there's a percent that will be. So one approach is taking them aside and having a separate talk with them. Another sometimes is organizationally setting limits. There's some roles that this person may not be allowed to have in the church hierarchy, because bullies often like to be leaders, and so they often want to get into the hierarchy. So it's in many ways just knowledge and awareness, and then setting limits individually or as an organization. And we've seen, church groups split over, polarization where half the community leaves. And usually when that happens, there's a bully in the picture somewhere. That bullies tend to polarize people, and they'll tell you these people are really jerks. And then they'll tell them these people are really jerks. And they'll feed a conflict that may exist, but was manageable. And so, a lot of church leaders and church members are good at managing conflict and saying, yeah, but let's see the good in everybody. But have to realize some people you have to set limits with. They can be good people, but the behavior's not okay.
With the world, I live in California, and the world was shut down for nearly 2.5 years, at least our world here. And it created this work from home environment where we could eventually avoid the HR department and the in-house office bullies and work being pawned on to somebody else. When someone has been working remotely for the last 4 years, now ends up going back to an office setting, how would they be able to prepare themselves for that culture shock of, I'm able to throw in a load of laundry, put the chicken in the oven, and get back to my report without the distractions of the office workers, and then to come back to the office and now deal with the socialization, the gossip coming up and interrupting your work, or telling you that Tom over there is doing something and Steve over here is doing something, and Stacy might have been doing something with the boss because the boss gave Stacy a ride home one night or whatever else. And then again, the piling on of work, like coming in from a quiet remote work space to a chaotic office. What would you tell people in that regard?
Well, of course, I would suggest they read my book. So they're
Naturally.
prepared because a lot of the examples are workplace examples. And some are extreme. So most of the time, hopefully, people won't be facing an extreme situation. But part of it is managing yourself, managing your own responses so you don't overreact or underreact. And, one simple thing is when things are happening is count to 10 to yourself before you react. Because it might just seem so obvious the other person's being a jerk with what they're asking for or doing. And they may have been spending the last 4 years at home too. So they may blurt things out that they regret once they're said. So we have to have a bit of kind of patience, but still firm limits. I think that will help. And just thinking like counting to 10, okay, all right, now I'm going to respond. That kind of slows us from that primitive emotional response that gets hooked without our awareness. So those are some of the things. One thing to add, though, is the research, and I put it at the beginning of the book, is that in the first couple of years of COVID, that they found that people were getting bullied more online related to their work than had been in the office. And I think online, there's fewer of the normal breaks, the empathy, the remorse, et cetera, that hold us back, that we just let everything out on people. So in a way, people are a little more reasonable in the office than online. But if you've heard them for 4 years online, you're not going to be happy to see them in person. But it's skills. I think a lot of this as skills, just practice skills, learn skills, and don't think in terms of good and evil people, but just think in terms of behavior, how to set limits, and I can do this, and it doesn't have to be complicated.
Bill, where could we find your website if we wanted to set a consultation meeting with you? And, if we're in the area or, via Zoom, the way we're doing this interview, in regards to adult bullying and conflict resolution?
Yeah, so our website is highconflictinstitute.com. It's www.highconflictinstitute, all one long word, .com. And we've got consultations, we've got trainings, we do online training, we do in-person training, we do a lot of traveling to train organizations and people at conferences. We have a lot of free articles. We also have a lot of books, which aren't too expensive. Most of them are under $20. So we have a lot of resources for people dealing with difficult people in their lives. In terms of where we're based, we're in San Diego. So if somebody was to come and we were to have a meeting with them or something like that, they would contact us online, and then we'd talk about where we would meet.
Bill, thank you so much.
Let me just add. So consultations, we do a lot of consultation, and people come with bullying situations in so many different settings: neighbors, workplace for sure, educational institutions, and you were talking about faith communities, but educational, higher education, and healthcare are two other areas where you're supposed to accept everybody, and bullies just show up and then start bullying people. So we have people in healthcare, people in higher education needing consultation. We've even had a city council that had a person that got on the council who was a high conflict bully, and they were figuring, how do we cope with this person for 2 years? So we consulted with like 4 other people from the council, not saying where that city was. But anywhere, businesses, boards of directors, and startups. I mentioned that in the book. Startups often have bully leaders to start a new idea, the aggressive personality, the persistence, the self-belief in themselves that puts them forward. But unless they get reined in and have limits set, they can destroy the business that they build. And so that's another area. But yeah, so I just wanted to emphasize consultations. We consult with people about all these different settings.
No, that's absolutely beautiful. And you reminded me of something. So we have neighbors in the neighborhood down the street. They're not directly next door, but they live across the street from each other. And they're very passive aggressive because come election time, one is red team, one is blue team, and they essentially turn their front yards into sign wars of who they're supporting politically. And it's this very strange passive aggressive thing between the two because they don't talk to each other, they don't look at each other, but you know, come August, there's going to be 18 signs in front of each one's house of people they've never met who they're adamantly supporting.
Yeah, and I fear that we're going to see more of that in the next few months. The key to polarization like that is for people to sit down in a neutral setting, one-to-one, and have a conversation about almost anything and see each other as human beings. And this, I believe, is a real factor of the online world. The polarization is fed by many ways modern media because you can isolate yourself and just talk to people who think the same way and listen to people who think the same way. And you can become in a silo in a way that was never possible before. And so we have these silos in which people hate each other in the other silo, but they don't even know them. And it's a nature of our communication, our media. In a sense, it's our human progress. We've given ourselves a lot of free time, and we spend some of that on political disputes. So I think we have to realize this isn't personal. This isn't about bad people. This is about different opinions, and we need to get to know each other as people. And that's where there's a bunch of research, including I mentioned in the book, that diffuses polarization when you have face-to-face discussions in neutral settings and forget about what color people are and just focus on what we have in common.
Bill, this is a fantastic book in our new world of adult bullies, and let's give the full title: Our New World of Adult Bullies: How to Stop them, or How to Spot Them, How to Stop Them. You know, you've had a tremendous career: therapist, lawyer, mediator, personality expert. I really want to thank you for today. Where will we be able to find the book if people were, you know, seeking this to purchase? And then again, remind us of your website to set up consultation.
They can get this book anywhere. So you can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores, and I'm a big fan of independent bookstores. We need to keep them alive. And also they can come and get it at our website. So we're High Conflict Institute, Mediator.com. One of the tabs is for books because we've got about 25 books available, all dealing with difficult relationships and such. But yeah, they can get this book anywhere. And I hope people really benefit from this because I think it's an eye opener, but it also gives people confidence. So be informed and don't be angry, be informed. Maybe that's the way to say it.
I like that. Bill Eddy, thank you so much for your time today.